On February 26, 2012, Trayvon Martin was shot by George Zimmerman, and unfortunately, this had sparked much controversy, as many blamed it to be basic racism, especially in a very conservative state as Florida. And with the situation getting even more heated as the trials went on, clearly there was chance for protests to begin. And after the verdict of George Zimmerman being seen as not guilty by the jury, this had clearly seen itself to be even more controversial as protests were sparked all across America. Now, focusing on the media, we see that the situation got even worse, as many media sources focused on Trayvon Martin over an even more controversial case as the Egyptian coup, and with many of media sources putting the spotlight on the Trayvon Martin cases, the situation became even more volatile, and with this leading to a more polarized America, it's clear that the situation needs to be calmed down. However, many are unsure of just how to do this. With violence spreading all across America, there's clear need for change. However, when focusing on self-defense, we have to understand that both the pro and the anti-Zimmerman supporters are seeing the situation as infringing on their rights, especially stand your ground laws, which in evidence is a situation where basically stating how far can I go, to what extent may I go to defend myself. And indeed, with the state of American security hanging in the balance, the Washington Post was forced to ask the question: will the George Zimmerman verdict change stand your ground laws in America? And the answer to the question is fortunately no, for the following three reasons. First, because it's going to lead to a more polarized America. Secondly, because the state law can't change this, or rather the federal law can't change state by state law. And lastly, because when focusing on the situation, we can clearly see that this would increase protests in America. So first, we're going to focus on the protests themselves. Attorney General Eric Holder, at a NAACP meeting, which is the National Association of Advancing Coloring People, Advancements of Colored People, had stated that he wanted to work on ideals that were for strengthening the national security based off of stand your ground laws. And indeed, when the National Rifle Association and other pro-gun lobbyists had seen themselves in a situation where they felt they couldn't defend their constitutional amendment to bear arms, we clearly see that rallies were being held just because of this itself. And indeed, many pro-gun holders have sided with that of George Zimmerman, even when they weren't for them. And thus we can clearly see this is added towards the protest, because National Rifle Association lobbyists and other such groups have added towards the rallies and other such protests, making this even more volatile. Indeed, according to a report done by the Christian Science Monitor just yesterday, we saw that unfortunately the situation had become even more violent as men with guns, men who are pro-guns, brought their guns to the streets of California and were shooting the guns in the air, while other rallies were headed in the same direction. And indeed, this had sparked chaos. And therefore, it's clear that stand your gun laws would not be effective simply because when looking at the situation, it can't, because there's so many protests going on as is, and the government cannot push for such actions. Secondly, we're going to focus on the legitimacy and the legal sense. Indeed, according to the Christian Science Monitor, dated July 18th, 2013, unfortunately for many who are for strengthening our, or who are for strengthening our standard ground laws, the situation is looking even more volatile. And for those who are looking, for those who are looking for change, we can clearly see that the legal sense isn't going to make any change, because the feds can't do anything except influence. Indeed, the case itself can push for more democratic and more liberal states to uptake a more strong stance on this. However, when the article went on to state that the federal government can only influence this, many liberal states didn't even push for this, and conservative states are clearly against this. And therefore, we can clearly see that many states would even see that their influence from the federal government isn't going to make the change that they're looking for. Therefore, it is imperative that we understand that the situation cannot change. Lastly, what we're going to notice is that this is going to lead to an even more polarized situation. Now, when looking towards celebrities, according to a Pew Global Research poll dated July 16th, 2013, many celebrities were pro-Zimmerman. However, many of them in a survey had stated that they, in public, had stated that they weren't. And unfortunately, this is leading for many of them not wanting to be criticized by the people themselves. However, Victor Cruz had stood by his word and had sent out a tweet. However, many of his pro-Zimmerman supporters were against him. And indeed, if in fact we change such laws, so not just celebrities, but people in general, our American citizens would see themselves even more polarized. Indeed, this is a key issue that could ignite the situation and become even more volatile than it is. And therefore, we have to re-examine today's question. Will the George Zimmerman case verdict lead to change in stand your ground laws in America? And the answer to this question is clearly no, for the three reasons that we discussed. First, because of protests going on in America. Secondly, because the federal government has no say in state-by-state laws. And lastly, because it's going to lead to an even more polarized America. So, therefore, we can clearly see that the Zimmerman case may not have had the type of lived happily ever after ending as many had supported. Thank you.